What's that sound? It's for amusement only, the EM and Bingo Pinball Podcast.
Welcome back to For Amusement Only. This is Nick Baldridge. Today I thought I'd get back to my riveting technical discussion and talk about how to change a broken switch. The first thing to do is to identify the size and application of the switch. If you're changing a switch inside a relay, which is where they are most commonly broken, or on the score motor, I guess that would be second. But on a relay, you need to identify how long the switch is and the size of the contact area. On a Gottlieb machine, one of the things that makes them a bit more difficult to work on than any other manufacturer is that the relays use these teeny tiny switches that have a very short travel. If you listen to my Jeffrey Lawton interview, he talks about that as well, and that's honestly something that I don't enjoy very much about working on Gottliebs, but I will say, again, once they're tuned up, and working appropriately, they tend not to go out of adjustment, and I feel like that's probably because of the shorter travel and the smaller, more rigid switch blades. So, if you're working in a Bally or Williams or any other EM manufacturer and you're inside a relay, the switches tend to be of a pretty similar length between all the other manufacturers. The next thing to analyze is whether or not your broken switch is the long blade or the short blade. The long blade extends through the relay actuator plate and has a contact somewhere further down that makes actual contact with the small blade. Changing out the larger blade means that you are going to have to get a switch either from a parts machine or from Steve Young at Pinball Resource and cut it down to the appropriate size. It needs to extend just beyond the actuator plate so that when the actuator moves, it actually moves that long blade. This is going to be pretty easy to do because you want to cut it to the exact same length as all the other long blades in that particular relay. Don't make it longer, don't make it shorter, just make it exactly the same length. As far as the short blade, most relays use a standard size switch, and they require a standard contact. They don't have to be the special tungsten contacts or silver contacts for high current applications like on a flipper. But a little trick: if you happen to have spare and a stroke switches for flippers, you can take part of the end of stroke switch, the short blade, and pop it in the relay switch stack, and it'll work just fine. So you can certainly scale up to a higher current switch, but you can't as easily, certainly, scale down. That is how things don't work and coils start smoking. So, changing the switch physically requires that you pull apart the relay, the switch stack. A relay is typically made of two switch stacks, which are set up side by side, and you will take a flathead screwdriver and unscrew two screws. That will allow you to remove one whole switch stack. You want to pull it clear of the relay actuator plate. When you do so, you want to be careful not to shear off any of the long blades in the switch stack. So pay attention and don't use a twisting motion to get it free. You want to pull it straight back if possible. Then what you have to do is take a flat-bladed screwdriver and pry apart the switch stack. The reason you have to pry it apart is because the switch stack is comprised of many small bakelite plates and 2 insulating cylinders. Those cylinders are very tightly press-fit into the bakelite spacers, and so you have to very gently pry them apart. Now, when you do so, you're going to realize very quickly that the switch stack is made of a bunch of teeny tiny little pieces, and as you pry it apart, those pieces are going to want to go flying. So make sure you're working in an area where you have either something down or you have your hand underneath it to catch the parts as they come free, because they're going to go rocketing off somewhere that you don't expect, and then you're going to have to improvise. Improvising a spacer is not recommended. So, once you pry it apart to the broken switchblade, you want to remove the previous switchblade from the stack. At this point, I will take twist ties, like from loaves of bread, and twist tie off the pieces and parts into the portions of the stack so that it's easier to reassemble. This is just a time-saving thing. You can also just kind of set the pieces aside if you're fairly confident that you're not going to bump into them and knock all of the bakelite pieces onto the floor, or worse, underneath the bottom board in your EM, which typically contains a transformer and a bunch of other relays. So you've gotten the bad switch out, but now you need to desolder it. You can certainly desolder it before taking the switch stack apart, but I find it a little easier once the whole thing is taken apart to pull the broken switch blade free. And once this is done, take your new switch blade, ensure that the contact is pointing in the appropriate direction. And I'll say that again for emphasis. Make sure that the contact on the new switchblade is pointing in the appropriate direction so that when you reassemble, it will actually make contact with the long blade. Never done it, but it would certainly be easy to reassemble upside down. Once the new switch is in place, at this point, I will solder in the wire if it's easy to do so. If it's not, then I will reassemble more of the switch stack until it's appropriately sandwiched. Then I will solder in the wire, and then reassemble the rest of the switch stack, and then screw it back down, and then adjust if need be. So, it's pretty simple. It can be daunting, but remember that those switches were put in the game for a reason. You may not realize right away what the purpose of that switch is, and this is where the schematic comes in handy. But realize that if a part could have been removed, it certainly would have been removed. These switches were not free, after all. So, that's all for tonight. Thank you again for joining me in reassembling your switch stacks. My name again is Nick Baldridge. You can reach me at foramusementonlypodcast@gmail.com. You can listen to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Pocket Casts via RSS, on Facebook, on Twitter @Bingo Podcast, And you can find me on Instagram at nbaldridge, and you can listen to us on our website, which is foramusementonly.libsyn.com, on which you can purchase a t-shirt. Thank you again for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.